So a friend of mine is a forester and he works often in the Adirondacks. If you know anything about New York State, like the whole top part of New York State is the Adirondacks, and he's up there a lot. But on the holiday time, more than any other time, he's going back and forth from Rochester, which is Western New York, to the top part of the state, and it's kind of a long drive. Anyway, he a couple years ago, he's texting me and he goes, I gotta tell you about this crazy story about this Santa Claus on a motorcycle. And he sends me a picture of this guy on a motorcycle in a Santa outfit. And next time we play euchre. So then that weekend, I'm over at his house and he tells me this story. So he's on the interstate near Albany, where, normally on an interstate, there's like two lanes, but near Albany, there's three lanes going on. That's important to understand. Okay. He's driving along and he said this guy on a motorcycle comes flying by him, like going 85 miles an hour. And he is on full, like, Santa outfit, right? He's got the red coat on, he's got the belt on, he's got the white, piece around his arms and black boots, and he has a Santa hat on that my friend Pat said it almost like it was stapled to his head because there was no way that that sucker was staying on, but it was, and he didn't have a helmet on, which is, against the law in New York State. He also had a white beard that was like split going this way, like in the wind as he was going by. So my friend Pat thought that was pretty funny. And then almost right away, this cop car puts on its lights, right? And starts tearing after the guy on the motorcycle. And if you knew my friend Pat, then this would make a lot of sense. But right away, he's like, I got to see what's going to happen here. So he speeds up, he follows the cop car. And soon enough, as he's trailing all of them, the motorcycle finds two semi trucks. So there's a semi truck here, and the motorcycle pulls in behind the semi truck in the far right lane. And then there's another semi truck, and then another semi truck comes and it moves into that second lane so that it's almost like protecting the guy on the motorcycle in a triangle of sorts of semis. So the guy's protected, the truck starts slowing down, but the cop's light's still going on, and he's, trying to get them to pull over, and nobody's doing anything. And then finally it gets back to two lanes, and the cops like almost stuck having to get back behind that semi truck that's the one part of the triangle, right? And they go on, Pat says, for almost 10 miles. And then finally, the police gives up and he turns around in one of those areas that only you can turn around in if you're a police officer and nobody else can, right? So he turns around, he goes the other way. And we all started laughing about that story because we thought it was pretty hilarious, because also Pat was driving farther down another 10, 15 minutes, and it turns out that the guy on the motorcycle was stopped on the side of the road and he's just resting on his motorcycle there. And that's the picture actually he sent me. So we all laughed about it, right? And but as I think about that story, and what I find most intriguing about it now, actually, is what made the cop drive away and what made those truckers like want to protect Santa to begin with. Now, on one level, I think it has to do with the pure myth of generosity and spirit and joy that Santa Claus connotes, how he represents all that we are supposed to be and do during the holiday season, and how that cop must have had a great story actually to tell his compatriots when he got back to the station, but also clearly he did not want to be on the naughty list, so he decided he's just going to go the other way. And on one level, my friend Pat's story serves as a metaphor, it seems to me, as a way to like a cultural protection of our version of the Christmas story by edging out other stories that came before the Santa story, stories that have more depth and meaning to them implicit in their ritualizing. Versions of the story that could actually deepen our spiritual growth by asking ourselves who really needs our gifts. A storyline that isn't based in consumerism as Santa is, but recognizes and actually takes seriously the least of these, sacrificing a little bit of ourselves for needs greater than our own. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you do enough digging, actually, you can find that there's quite a complicated story and a long history of how we got to this version of Santa Claus, a tradition that Santa kind of brings back is intriguing in its retelling, and it's a little distressing given the fact that where we've ended up. So here it is. This all has to do with wassailing. Wassailing was pretty much a holdover from the pagan celebrations of midwinter and solstice. Wassailing involved a reversal of role from servant to owner and owner to servant, and it was initiated by the poor, not by the wealthy. So if you think back to before the industrial age, right, to the agrarian culture, in that time, during the solstice, workers or serfs of a landowner would go to the manor house for drinking and frivolity and eating, and that was known as wassailing. They were welcomed into the manor house, but it was more of a like a demand of recognition on the peasants' part, an act of being seen more than an invitation that originated from the wealthy. And for the landowner's hospitality, the workers would extend their goodwill, usually through drinking songs, and then give the landowner a reprieve from their presence and the reality of their own dire circumstances until the next year came around. So the landowners at the time actually thought it was their duty, like their responsibility for one day of the year to change that landscape of class. And for the most part, it worked pretty well, honestly, until the industrial age. And then things changed. Now, if you think about it, right, the poor who went wassailing were no longer on your like your servants or your serfs, right? You didn't rent land to them. They didn't live near you. They weren't in relationship with you. Instead, the poor were laborers and fishermen and factory workers and domestics. Moreover, they didn't live on your land or anywhere near where you resided. And as the industrial age kind of grew, the working class and the wealthy got farther and farther apart from each other, both in proximity and in experience. And as that significant kind of gap happened, wassailing degraded into a more threatening, actually, kind of behavior. There was a certain kind of carnival rowdiness to all of it. Urban gangs got involved, and then it got violent at times. There were even such things known as Christmas riots. So, given these changes in wassailing, you can begin to see how actually there would have been a desire, in particular from the wealthy class, to give a new spin to the season. So enter Clement C. Moore, right? Moore was a wealthy landowner in the beginning of Manhattan's history. His estate stretched across most of what has become modern Chelsea. That was in the 1830s. That's just his estate, by the way, not Moore's personal wealth. His personal wealth at the time was around $500,000, which in today's dollars is about $16 million. So Moore had money and influence. And pretty much he and his friends were distressed by this wassailing business and wanted the season to take the attention off of the poor coming into their home and demanding attention uninvited. Because even in the industrial age, it was expected as somebody who had money that that was what was going to happen at that time of year. You would open up your doors, people would come in, they would kind of show themselves to you, and you had to invite everyone in. So Moore came up with this crafty solution. He wrote the poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." You all know this. I know you do. "'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature is stirring, not even a mouse." Now, I have until recently thought that that version of Santa Claus was basically the retelling of the Dutch version of Santa that was brought to the New World and slowly Americanized. But get this, truth be told, that's not the case at all, which was precisely what Moore and his wealthy friends wanted you to believe. So Moore and his advantaged friends in the early 19th century were part of an elite kind of social niche known as the Knickerbockers. As you know, I know you guys know this, but New York City actually was first inhabited by the Dutch, right? And then the English came in and they started staking their ground. And this group of Knickerbockers were British. In his book, The Battle for Christmas, Stephen Nissenbaum describes the Knickerbockers like this. He says they were politically conservative, reactionary even, opposed to democracy, which they identified actually with mob rule, and fearful of both the working class and the bourgeois. The Knickerbockers felt that they belonged to the ruling class whose authority was under siege. And from that angle, their invention of Santa Claus was part of what we can now see as a larger, ultimately quite serious cultural enterprise, because they forged a pseudo Dutch identity for Santa by playing up kind of the folksy end of who he was and hoping then to create a cultural switch from the upper class being the givers of goodwill during wassailing time to a mythic figure that took up that charge instead. So Moore's poem, which actually was written in 1822, was originally part of, what he had written for his family. But then quite soon after that, it was published in all the New York papers at the time, and then in all those big cities on the East Coast around there. Philadelphia, DC, any area that had a large paper, it showed up. And pretty much that storyline then became the predominant storyline. And in so doing, it kept at a bare minimum the riffraff, aka the working class and the poor, out of their homes. So as Nissenbaum points out, if Moore's upper class readers were to be comfortable at Christmas time, they needed to actually have at their disposal a class of dependents who, through their kind of expression of goodwill, would assure them that they had fulfilled their obligations after all. So the invention of Old Saint Nick effectively substituted their own children for the needy and homeless outside of their house. And with that change, they preserved the structure of the older Christmas ritual in which people occupying positions of social and economic authority offered gifts to their dependents. Children in their own household had replaced the poor outside it as the symbolic objects of charity and deference. So that ritual of social inversion was still there, but it now remains securely within the household. It's brilliant, actually. Moore's version integrated the social classes in a scene that kind of had this like shared festivity where the poor posed no threat now and gratefully accepted their place. It relinquished actually the wealthy from the fear of harm by those from another social class and the pressure actually of actually feeling any guilt at all for their social status to boot. When I first learned all of that, my heart sank a little bit. I mean, it sank. Because now in our time, right, we are just following, this is gross to me. We are following through on some wealthy guy's desire to detach himself and his friends from any social or communal obligation to needs greater than his own. And we've replaced any connection to the other with trying to satisfy our own family's sense of belonging and love into a commercial enterprise. And when I say a commercial enterprise, according to one source, this year, 84% of Americans are going to spend more than $1,000 just on Christmas gifts alone. That's not like food or, decorations or any of that other stuff. With a grand total, if you add it all up as to like what families are paying for everything, food, going out to eat, having like parties that they're going to. It comes to about 900 billion in gift spending alone. 66% of those people are going to go into debt trying to make their family and friends happy by buying into that myth. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there, though, you guys, is a gift in all of this. Santa is a made-up tradition, one that for the most part doesn't deepen or stretch our spirituality at all. It doesn't help us dig into like values that we as religious people kind of want to honor or claim as our own. It doesn't help us with pursuing such things as like gratitude or generosity, peace, welcoming in the stranger, right? Offering solace and comfort to the disheartened, the poor, the forgotten. Here's the thing, and where this leaves us is the beauty, I think, is that this is all a made up, invented tradition. In truth, actually, I mean, really, if we get down to it, all of our traditions are made up and invented, aren't they? They are all kind of like an assimilation, amalgamation, appropriation, a melding, a crafting, a reinventing, a mix of the old and the present day. There's nothing new really about any of that. It's just that we can't go back, right, in time and say, oh, that's the real thing. Or we want to celebrate a pure, kind of authentic Christmas holiday that taps into the power and values and meaning of the season. But here's what I got to say to all of that. So what, actually? In fact, I think there's a strange grace that we've been given with the celebration of Christmas because it is an invented holiday. Which means what? We get to invent it so that it matches our values and our beliefs in a way that is more meaningful and powerful and authentic than the commercialized version it has become. Better yet, we have some places to turn to help us in that construction. So wassailing, this is so amazing to me, but it's true. Wassailing is older than Christianity. I want you to listen to that for a second. It's older than Christianity. And if you want to get to the origins of the season and what to pay attention to in it, it is this tradition, actually, that stayed around for a couple thousand years until, as we've learned, Moore and his cronies stepped in, right? Wassailing is what? It is the poor wanting and demanding to be seen. The modern day equivalent of this is perhaps a homeless person kind of staring you in the face and knocking on your door and standing in your vestibule and really not going anywhere until you actually looked at them and saw them for who they were. Kind of like doing more than my mistake in opening words, right? It is actually seeing people. It is recognizing that the poor's life and circumstances are really quite different than our own predominantly middle-class lives. It means, I think, that for one day of the year, taking into our homes, metaphorically, being the host and seeing that as our responsibility means sacrificing in small and big ways on their behalf. It means, of course, like days of old, that those who have less than we do are the recipients of our hospitality and generosity and gifts, that at the very least, for one day out of the year, we try to reverse the role in significant, meaningful ways. I actually understand that you guys have a metaphorical wassailing opportunity inside your congregation coming up on Christmas Eve. So you know your congregation is soliciting gifts for the Ministerial Discretionary Fund, a fund actually designed to help out your fellow parishioners when life hits hard. Perhaps a hurricane blew through and there's a gap in what insurance is going to pay for and what repairs need to take place. Perhaps there are those amongst you whose safety net has many holes in it. Holes that can set you back and put you in debt. Holes that devastate one's sense of well-being and security. That's what that fund, by the way, covers. All those times that life hits you hard and you need the support and love of your community to hold each other up. When you give to the Ministerial Discretionary Fund, you are seeing others' needs as your own. It's really that simple. My point though, is that during the holiday season, I invite you to some metaphorical wassailing to better invest in needs greater than your own. That may be through the Ministerial Discretionary Fund. It may be through some outside group that kind of captures your imagination and your heart. But do something, friends, that invites you into the lives of the least of these. Hear their stories, see them, know them, and give of yourself and your treasure to their well-being. And bring it back to this season of deeper connection and goodwill to your fellow human beings. Actually, here's what I want us to do. Honest to gosh, okay? I want us to be the cop on the motorcycle, but not give up. I want us to pursue that Santa Claus till those truck drivers drive off to their exit or stop at a way station. I want us to follow that Santa Claus over the river and through the woods. I want us to follow him until he finally has to stop. And there, I want us to give him a ticket, not a warning, but a ticket. A ticket actually for taking away our responsibility to the common good, which is ours. He is indeed guilty, though we've honestly let him have the job, but we know better. So with his ticket in hand, we can send him off to get some milk and cookies of his own, while we, newly anointed, can take up the job of paying a little more attention to those who need us to see them, to hear them, and support them. May that be our holy work, my friends. May that be our holy work. Amen.